Wednesday morning, September 7th, 2022. It is the Beating the Book podcast. Gill Alexander, thank you all for tuning in. I know the megapod is what most are waiting for, and the first megapod of the season on the NFL is tomorrow. Guessing Lines, the first one of the season is on Monday, and so you're probably saying to yourself, what kind of podcast are you jamming in right here before football season, Gill? Well, this is a podcast that is really a follow-up to a podcast that Sean Patrick Griffin and I did 11 years ago when he wrote the book Gaming the Game about what is arguably the biggest sports betting story, quite frankly, of the last, 20 years in this country. And that is why every time there is something in the media about the Tim Donaghy betting scandal, it sort of is like a flare-up, and we decide we want to talk about it. Sometimes we do it on a numbers game. We decided this time we want to do it in podcast form, and not only is Sean Patrick Griffin kind enough to join us again, Sean, who, by the way, is the author of Gaming the Game back in 2011, the story behind the NBA betting scandal, and the gambler who made it happen, but we also have the gambler who made it happen, Jimmy Battista, one of Tim Donaghy's co-conspirators in this case. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure, Phil.
So, listen, I have, and I really mean that when I say that, like the reason we do this is because it is the biggest story there is, and I have so much to say about the Netflix special. This is what, by the way, why it comes up specifically is the Netflix special Untold, Operation Flagrant Foul, which premiered last week. And Sean, I know you have much to say, I have much to say, but Jimmy, I want to start with you. And you're allowed to curse, by the way, sir. So I just want to point that out on top because it's podcast form. But what is your impression of the portrayal that actually ended up on the screen? Your portrayal. What was your thoughts?
Well, in all respect to Netflix, I think the McLean and Chapman Way and Jake Filson-Grant, they did a tremendous job because I don't think people know how long it actually takes to put a documentary together. And they worked on this for over a year. Now, I filmed over 14 hours on my behalf for the Netflix documentary. And it was more aligned with Timmy, Elvis Donaghy, and that narrative that they spin with. The way they portrayed me, I think they missed the entire beat on my life gambling and the animals who were involved and were gambling for the past 25 years that were involved with it.
Yeah, and I should probably not assume that everybody knows the story, but in general terms, again, Tim Donaghy pled guilty, for those who were trapped under a heavy object all these years, pled guilty to conspiracy to engage in wire fraud and transmitting wagering information through interstate commerce. That's what he was charged with. Ultimately, so basically, in layman's terms, he agreed to admit to betting on games, but he never admitted to fixing games. And Sean Patrick Griffin joins us as well, again, former professor of criminal justice at Penn State Abington. He was associate professor of criminal justice there. He now is a professor of criminal justice at the Citadel. Sean, you and I talked a little before this. The reason that this is so frustrating for you is that you wrote what I like to call the Bible on this subject. And the scandal itself is very nuanced. Jimmy's portion, which is the gambling portion that most of this audience is going to be fascinated by, but it's the fact that there's the story and then there's how the media portrays it. Isn't that the crux of what's so bothersome here?
Yes, and Jimmy was very polite because he actually knows the people who were involved in the production. My issue is, if you're going to do something like this, where the entire documentary is framed through Tim Donaghy's versions of events, that's fine. I have issues with it, but at least tell your audience that. And my issue with the documentary is, that's not only not disclosed, but then they selectively choose, like Jimmy just got done telling you, he did 14 hours of interviews. I don't know how many they did with Tommy Martino, the co-conspirator, or Phil Scala, the former FBI supervisor. But my goodness, they selectively chose portions and edited them to craft and support Donaghy's version of events. And my issue, and Jimmy knows this, my issue is that they had access to things that debunk what they literally put on screen. And look, I'm a big boy. I get why they do things for clicks, views, and ratings. But that thing is so polished, it looks so compelling, that people have no way of knowing, well, it's actually not what happened.
So isn't that it? So in the end, I'll just tell you my takeaway from it watching it. Let's say I hadn't followed this. Let's say I was my buddy Tommy in DC who's watching this for the first time. He has vague recollection of the Tim Donaghy thing. In his head, I think like most people, the recollection is, oh yeah, Tim Donaghy, bet on games, big scandal. Okay, let me watch this. I think his takeaway from this documentary was at the very end, he probably was like, oh, it's one giant he said, right? And so that, like, to me, that was my big takeaway from this one. Jimmy, I don't know, would you agree with that? Like that was sort of, that might have been the takeaway of many, and that ultimately it's not a he said.
Well, it's definitely not. It is a part of it is a he said, she said. But like most people that don't know me, they're like, they got clips of me and John Gotti and Sammy the Bull Gravano as they're walking down the streets. In other words, John Gotti's dead when this happens. Gravana is on release in Arizona, whatever his thing he's allowed to do right now. And so it would make me more like I was more involved with the Gambinos and, orchestrating them for able to make millions of dollars. Now, I did say, and the truth is, yes, in my lifestyle, in the amount of money I was moving, it's me using them as an outlet is like you going to Target, you going to Strawberries and Clover, you going to Amazon. It was a different outlet for me to move money. So you didn't go move millions of dollars on a daily basis without, working with certain groups. Was I involved in that groups? Only from business, and that was moving money. Anything else was totally there's no truth to it.
Yeah, I sort of want to keep giving context to people, again, who didn't hear necessarily our podcast from 11 years ago, Sean, although I'll link it because we really did it sort of step by step back then. But Tim Donaghy, NBA official, had a buddy named Jack Concannon who he was passing information to. Concannon was making bets, but then obviously when Donaghy was feeding him information, Concannon's bets ratcheted up. Jimmy, who's kind enough to be on this podcast, noticed that. So therefore was able to sort of exploit that information as well. There's no argument with any of that. But what ends up happening is the FBI, which is in a much bigger crime investigation, right, that involved the Gambino family, heard an NBA referee, an active NBA referee in one of their wiretaps, Tim Donaghy, and it sort of explodes from there. I don't know if that's a good summation of it, Sean, but that's sort of, those are the nuts and bolts of it.
It gets complicated, obviously. But the thing is, to follow up on what Jimmy just said, he gave his own analogy. My whole thing is, and Jimmy can talk far more about this than I can, my issue has always been that that's been the focus of the media. Yes. Either because it's sexy to sell or because it helps Donaghy. Donaghy loves it because it deflects the attention away from him and makes him a victim. Don't forget, his argument is that, originally his argument was that Tommy Martino and Jimmy Battista were Gambino crime family members. If you go back and look at what he says in his book and in the 2009 media tour, he says that they visited him in December of 2006 and threatened his life and kids. So when we're talking about whether Jimmy was dealing with people 1 or 2 degrees removed from that, I write about that in Gaming the Game. No one's ever contesting that. We're talking about the idea that the mob was extorting Tim Donaghy or that they had anything to do with this. Like Jimmy just said, do you know how many people he was moving money with all around the world for years? And the thing is, with the NBA betting scandal, by the time this happens, this scandal's been going on for years. And Jimmy can say more about this. The money that they were dealing with was pennies compared to the animals and everybody else.
Yeah, and it occurs to me, and you also mentioned this, Sean, in some of your stuff, that Donaghy would make a great politician because he stays on message. So because this story is nuanced, he sort of gets away with this year after year where it's okay, oh yeah, I was threatened by the mob. Battista himself threatened me. Jimmy, you remember that claim from Tim. But the other thing is the general betting public, right? So while this audience, the audience of this podcast is more sophisticated than others, right? We're familiar with the animals and we're familiar with just how much money was moved back in the day. But when the general conspiracy-loving sports fan or sports bettor hears that, the NBA could have, they wanted to squash all of this. And we're willing to believe Donaghy's thoughts about the NBA sort of, wanting to be a portion of this, where it's like Donaghy keeps saying, I'm just doing what the NBA is telling me, right? If they told me to emphasize this particular foul on this given night. So it's this confluence of events that makes that makes the public willing to believe him. Is that fair?
Sean?
Oh, I think that's absolutely fair. Jimmy's laughing because I imagine being Jimmy Battista all this time, by the way, as he's hearing all of this and knows what happened. Yes. And by the way, I get a kick. For your audience doesn't know, I haven't physically seen Jimmy like this, even on a Skype or a Zoom, in 9 years. So I'm getting a kick out of seeing him smile. But with regard to that, so with the whole issue of him being a mobster or whatever, that's ludicrous. But people, like you just said, Gill, though, people want to believe in these conspiracies, whether it's about the NBA dictating outcomes, whether it's the mob was, threatening Tim Donaghy through Jimmy Battista. For whatever reason, either it's confirmation bias or people just like a sexy story. And my argument all along has been, my goodness, an NBA official fixing games over 4 NBA seasons isn't sexy enough?
Yeah. No, it's no question. But do you think, Sean, I guess here's the question for you. Do you think this is ever going to change? Like, in other words, you're fighting the good fight to try to hey, I care about the truth. I care that, listen, there are betting records that any of these people can check to corroborate the fact that, this was a real thing. He wasn't, as Jimmy said early in the documentary. Good Lord, they were saying, was he fixing it? He's like, no. And he's the greatest fixer of all time, this guy, right? And there's betting market moves to document everything. No one feels the need to check on this. So I guess my question to you, Sean, is do you think this will ever change? Because part of the thing of just being on this side of the desk in media, you and I talked about this a little offline. So many members of the media just want to get a task done and move on to their next project. They are less concerned with getting things accurate than they are just completing the task and moving on and keeping their jobs. So do you think it'll ever change on this story? I hate to be cynical about it.
Hold on, Sean. Let me hop in here. Yeah, let's get something very significant that I had a problem with, maybe that Netflix cut out. If you're a NBA beat reporter who's paying your bills, and back in the day, David Stern, and today, Adam Silver, you're going to do what Big Daddy fucking tells you to do. So they're going to change and write what the boss says to do. You got all these outlets. Stephen A. Smith, Scott, what the hell's his name, Sean?
Scott Eden?
All the different outlets that the NBA has, they're told what to say and what to do.
Jimmy,
I have a problem with that.
I'm more referring, you're right about that, but I'm more referring to a guy like me or other independent podcasters. You guys are doing other media today, I would assume. Sean, at least I know you are. Yeah. They are not beholden to the NBA, yet they still do the lazy thing. So, you're right about the NBA guys. They're going to do what the NBA tells them to for sure. But what about those guys? Will they ever get that right? I don't think they will.
Wait, this is funny. Your public needs to hear this, because I thought what Jimmy was going to say was the following. He and I reconnected a few weeks ago or whatever, and when we're talking about a lot of this stuff. And the public would think that Jimmy would be outraged at the way that he is being portrayed as much as I am. I get very animated on these shows. And people must think, well, heck, if they were saying that about him, he'd go crazy. He is so used to this by now that he just goes, look, they're going to lie about me, and it is what it is. So he actually thinks I'm the kooky one fighting the fight, because he's like, look, that ship has sailed.
Yeah. Jimmy?
That face it, Gill, that's the sexy part of the story. Jimmy the Sheep Battista, Gambino crime associated, fucking threatening Kim and his daughters. Let's run with that. Let's just run with that, because that's what people, oh my God, Jimmy's a Gambino guy. He's fucking threatened Timmy and his family. Either you fix his fucking game or Popeye and the gang's coming down to threaten him. Get the fuck out of here. Timmy was so happy to be working with us. He wasn't, now listen, going back to, we were doing this 3 years prior to I took over and made the deal with Timmy. 3 years of betting Timmy's games. Can you think about this? 3 fucking solid years of moving Timmy's games. The Animals were. The Animals were betting his games prior to I took this over.
Yeah.
Now you got to comprehend that these games were being fixed, and it was all under the umbrella.
And
now,
yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gil. I'm sorry.
No, your turn. Go ahead.
So, like at this point, like for the NBA to be like, oh fuck, oh my god. So the NBA at that point, you know, they got to cover everything up. They got to hide this. We're talking every time a game was fixed and Timmy controlled an outcome. If you're at the end of the season back then and you're 41 and you in your division and you don't make the playoffs. Well, you're losing out for your home team. If you're the Portland Trailblazers, you're the Orlando Magic, or you're the Detroit Pistons, or whoever you are in the NBA, you got ousted. So you're talking concessions, parking, shirt sales. If you're a manager on the team, if you're a trainer, the bonuses that these players and individuals got screwed over by Big Daddy Stern because they had to go back so many years. Then you're talking about dishonest services that came in. So he's like, he put such a fucking beautiful umbrella on this and is like, no. Why is it only 12 frigging games? That was 12 games in 2006, 2007. It was 47 games. I have it documented.
Yeah. But
why? Because the more it would have... Go ahead, Gil. I'm sorry.
No. I'm sorry. Please.
It was best thing for the NBA in that point, and they had to cover it up because, like Netflix asked me, "Do you think it was? Does it turn into wrestling?" I said, "I think it was long. It was closer to wrestling than it was anything else because, in the way that we were doing it, and now that there was more information coming out that the NBA itself, their league officials, like Timmy brought a good point with the Iverson claim." He goes, so in other words, if your boss is telling you, you call that palm on Allen Iverson, and they were and then he's like all happy about it. So him and his team and the other officials, I'm running with it, oh my God. Here's a number. We're laying 4.5 on the game and what it goes to. And when I get done with it, the game's now 7.5 or 8. But at that point, if you think about it, if you have 3 guys on the court with a whistle in their hand and they're saying, we're going to fuck Allen Iverson in the ass tonight. We're not going to let him get to the foul line. If he comes around and palms the ball, NBA's got a problem. So in other words, we're going to tell you what to do and how to call the game. I do agree with that with Timmy. Did I Did I make money off it and the Animals did? Absolutely, we did.
Yeah, and you bring up a lot of points. I have so much to ask because one of them is that's part of it too, right, Sean? And what Jimmy's bringing up is, again, back to the messaging. Tim Donaghy had enough things to create this plausible deniability, right? So exactly what Jimmy was talking about. You and I talked about this before, which is he didn't fix games by doing things obvious. He actually did so by being more of a by-the-book referee sometimes, right? Oh, look, palming. Tim Donaghy says, look, I was ranked top 3, right? How could I possibly be ranked top 3 and be fixing games?
Stop a second, Gill.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. He did. There's some games in some of the games, and I have to go through game footage at the end of the game where the number was close to what we were betting. And I'm thinking to myself, and there's a great part in Netflix, and I don't mean to cut you off, when I'm sitting there, and I'm on the edge of my seat, and I'm like, oh, fuck. Oh, please. Is he going to call this foul or not? Because it was it was no reason for him to call the foul. But if you're laying 3.5 on the game and you want to put somebody on the foul line, it changes everything.
So he did at times. So give me a sense, Jimmy, how, of all your bets, what percentage were you watching every single moment of?
I didn't miss a minute. How could I?
Not a minute of
it. I watched, every game, every call was, worthwhile. I mean, because it changes the whole outcome. I'm a gambler. I go from the beginning from the first second the ball taps to who's the more physical team, who's getting the calls. You can get a feel for how the referees are going to base the game on what they're going to call and not going to call. And if I see that Timmy Duncan in the first quarter's got 2 fouls called on him right away, I'm like, yes, now we know who's controlling the game and what's going on. If they're going to call walks and fouls, if it affected the total, if we bet over in that game and they're going to let them run they're going to run like and not call nothing. There's so many different intrinsic things about a referee with that whistle in hand that affects the outcome of the game. Timmy was the fucking king of doing that.
What percentage? What
Sorry,
what percentage? Because I think this is the part that we never have really heard from Jimmy. The living through it. I think this is the fascinating part for gamblers, right? Because we get it. There's millions on the line. Just like if we're betting $100 or $1,000 on a side in an NFL game, we're watching every single thing. But now Jimmy knows what's supposed to happen. What percentage? Donaghy said it was 70%. What percentage got home for you? Would you say?
Oh, it was about 77.8%.
So of the 22.2% that didn't. Were you cursing him?
Well, listen, let's talk about this. In that games, I bet several games that now I've never heard it was out of Timmy's mouth. And this is, as I even said it on Netflix, I said it wasn't, these weren't Timmy's games. So in reality, he picked better because there was another referee involved. Now, after me going to Tommy saying, who the fuck's this guy? Like that, he goes, I said, he's not on the fucking, now hold on, let's go back up a second. The deal when I made with Dim and the thing, after the Marriott, I said, I want your referee schedule. So I had the complete referee schedule of what the officials were, where they were working and what was going on. So I know where Timmy was going. I knew I saw the whole itinerary. He sent that to me and I had a copy of it. So I know where he was traveling, what was going on, how I was going to focus on the game, and how I was going to manipulate it. So, hold on, Gill. Go back to your original question. My
original question was, because I think this is fascinating for gamblers. So you've got all this money on the line. You sometimes, before with the animals and then without the animals thereafter. But you've got all this. So he's hitting about 78% of these. My
point was, and you said that, I said, well, out of the 10 games we lost, 6 of them were I assumed they're Scott Foster's. Now, did I hear that out of Timmy's mouth? No, I did not. Only thing I said, Tommy, who the fuck is this guy? He goes, I think it's fucking Scott Foster. Because every time I'm on the phone with them and we're together, he won't let me talk to him. He won't let me hear what he's saying. So right there's a little chicanery going on between the two of them. But he said, just bet them and we'll go with the games. So in reality, if I want to say it, Timmy even picked better than that. So we technically only lost 3 or 4 games out of it. The games that we lost, now, as I said, and this is very key for the public, so I'm like, I didn't never talk to Scott Foster. Did I start to bet these games because I thought we had an edge and there was another referee that was working with us? Yes, I did. And Tommy said, Jimmy, it's Scott Foster. So every game that we bet of him on the agenda and the referee came up, his name was on one of the 3 referees. So I went with it out of the first 3 games, we went 1-3, and I'm like, then it's 1-4, and at this point, I'm like, what the fuck, Tommy? What the fuck's going on here? I'm laying 7 on the game, and it's moving money, and we don't got a prayer. And then of course I'm watching all the games. I'm like, he don't know what the fuck he's doing. Like Timmy was that good. He in his brain he was saying, who do I need to put on the bench? What calls I need to make? Because he knew. Remember, this is the most important thing that people forget. When we did the code, Mom and Chuck and Johnny and stuff like that, I took the line. They knew what the line was. If the line was 4.5 on the game, circle that bitch, okay? Because that was the line that he had to cover, and that was the one that was in. Now, the rest of the public may have been laying 6, 7, or whatever it was, but he knew what the line was. So in his mind, as he's working the entire game, I said, listen, you want to get paid? We got to cover that line. I don't care how you get to the promised land. We got to cover that. You got to cover that line.
I would. My listeners right now, the listeners to this are going to kill me if I don't follow up on the Scott Foster thing. Scott Foster, brief aside here, is still a referee in the National Basketball Association today. When we do shows every day, Monday through Friday, during the NBA playoffs particularly, but also during the NBA season, but really specifically during the playoffs, this is very common. It's not just my show, it's every show. It's very common for us to be like, oh, Scott Foster game. You know what the NBA needs tonight? They need to extend this series to 7. And so, this gets back to the nuance of it. Donaghy's very believable when he talks about, they have a broader agenda. So it gives him this this sort of appearance of, oh, this guy's somewhat believable on the broader things, which he might be. Both things can be true. He might be true on the broader things. He might be a lying sack of you-know-what on all the specific things to this. Scott Foster's still a referee. Do you, Jimmy, believe that he is up to, beyond just helping to extend a series, do you believe that he might be up to other things? Asking you to speculate.
To speculate on his current stage that he's working for the NBA today or next season or the past season, no, because after all the scrutiny that happened, back at 10, 12 years ago, he's like, fuck, I can't do this. If he was involved, now this is my speculation, that cost me and the animals millions of dollars, okay? And then his name comes out, and it's only advantageous for Timmy in the NBA. That's because Timmy made a deal. Now remember, Timmy was going to fuck his fellow referees over and the NBA because they made the FBI said, you're going undercover. Then Big Daddy leaks it to the press. So because he knows that the NBA's done at that point. The fact that Foster, as I said, I could never prove it. Someday I would like to have a conversation with them. I don't think that will ever happen. Yeah. But on them games and how Timmy did, he probably could have been involved. Then again, like I said to him, if he wasn't involved, then the thing after. Now remember, when you go into a serious case like this, and I got a pallet full of cases of paper, discovery. So the first thing I went through when I was working with Jack, he goes, Jimmy, get to work. Let's go through the phone records. I go through the phone records, and I'm looking and I have Timmy's, and I got everyone's involved. And I'm looking, and I'm like, holy shit, Timmy and Scott are talking before games, after games, and a few times at halftime. Now, Gill, I don't know, the way it usually works. I said, when you get done work, you call your significant other, your wife, whoever it may be. Hey, hon, how you doing? How's the kids? I just got out of the game. I'm heading back to the hotel, blah, blah, blah. Unless it was NBA protocols for these just two refs to talk, they talked before and after every game that Timmy worked and the games that Scott worked. Now, my point is, the days that they didn't ref games, the chat wasn't there. The phone calls, the 6-7 calls per day wasn't there. So in my mind, I'm like, this is starting to add up even more. That the way that, it was more of a cover-up. So the NBA, in my brain, in my mind, saying, you know what, we're going to put a kebab on Scott Foster. He was just, had a bad friend. It was Tim Donaghy, and we're going to run with that. So does it make it easier for Timmy if Timmy made a deal with the government and David Stern at that time when they were on talking terms? Yes, Scott had nothing to do with this. So once his story comes out, they're going to run with it.
Sean, do you believe the NBA leaked the whole thing so that the FBI investigation just stopped in its tracks?
I have no evidence of that, and that's all. That's all I say. I've heard that for years. I have no evidence of that. I have plenty to say about the stuff that you guys have been talking about for 10 minutes, by the way, but I'm being a nice, polite person.
All right, hold on, nice and polite person, please. Listen, I'm a numbers guy, and you got to think about this. You're only speculating. You're going to think to me at this moment that, and after all the information you've had over the past 10 to 12 years, okay, this is speculation only, Dr. Griffin. So you're going to think that he had nothing to do with working with Timmy.
Scott, wait, no, I was asking Gill's question about the NBA leaking it to end the thing.
Oh, no, I apologize.
With regard to Foster, don't forget, IRA and gaming the game, one thing that no one's considering is that when they're talking all this time, Jimmy's argument back in 2008 was, why isn't anyone considering that Foster is copying the bets on Donaghy's games? That's been my argument all along, which is when Jimmy says, hey, look, the NBA is covering this up, I always say people are misinterpreting what he's saying, because what he just said is they're not even doing a real investigation. Don't forget, the FBI believed Donaghy at the beginning. They thought, oh, no, it's just inside information. He's not fixing games. And then the NBA, again, don't forget, doesn't have access to Battista, Martino, or Donaghy, doesn't have access to the FBI files or the FBI agents. And they immediately do the report and it comes out. And the media loves it, and they say, oh, all good here. And I always say, imagine Enron producing a report that says no fraud here, right? I mean, it's laughable, but that's how it went away. So we don't know what they researched. There's no evidence, by the way, that they researched Scott Foster in the way that Jimmy was just talking about. But we know the FBI didn't. The FBI wrote about it and said, well, yeah, he said that he was probably greased for information by Donaghy. That, yeah, maybe that's what Timmy was doing. He was pumping me for information. Because they weren't looking at it through the lens that we're all talking about right now.
Sean, in all these years, you've never talked to Donaghy, right?
No.
No interest.
I've been offered opportunities like this, by the way, to be on podcasts or TV shows, and I've accepted, of course. But he originally accepts and then says no.
And then says no.
Yeah.
So, it occurs to me also, and I'm just thinking out loud here, but like David Stern ruled with an iron fist. Like that was so clear in this documentary too. Like David Stern runs the whole show. It's almost like, the NBA had this unbelievable good fortune of having him as the commissioner at the time. I wonder if it were another commissioner, would they have been able to play this chess game as well? I don't know if that's ever occurred to you, Jimmy, at all.
I didn't really think about it, but the more I look at what Stern did and how he just did everything to keep it undercover. Now, you got to cover it up. First of all, in the past 120-some years in all sports, there's never been a scandal like this. I'm sorry to say. And what went on. But him, the more I think about it is like the power he had. Like he fed Paul Harris, Jerry Conrad, and blowjob Phil Scala, all this information. And I say because Phil, and you're saying to me, Jimmy, why would you even say that, just being disrespectful? He says in it, after Stern offers him a job in the Netflix special, that he would never work with someone that he was investigating. Well, after the investigation's over, does anyone take notice that Phil and Timmy are butt buddies, and Phil writes the preface for Timmy's book because he believes him? So he made money off Timmy. So if he was so gung-ho about this Gambino guy and putting, all these people to bed, and John Gotti sat in that fucking chair, and you're not going to lie to me. Well, 2 months later, and then now he's right. They're writing a book together. So in my mind right there, it says to me, who knows what the NBA paid him?
Sean, your thoughts on all that?
I'm still 10 minutes ago in this conversation.
Go back 10 minutes then. What do you got from 10 minutes ago?
I just want to just a few points because I know your audience loves hearing. I know your audience loves hearing Jimmy. First of all, don't forget, Donaghy's argument was that he bet equally on games he didn't officiate as those he did. And I've always argued, because don't forget, if inside information, like all the things that David Stern was telling him, really was the reason, then yeah, he could be bet on any game and he'd be doing fine. But that's what Jimmy was just telling you, and I show it in data in Game in the Game, is ridiculous. And by the way, they show on the documentary, they reference the code that Jimmy just referenced, right? Martino and Donaghy joke about the code on the documentary. Mm-hmm. Well, the code only works if you know what game you're betting that night, and the games were Donaghy's games. So that's one thing. The other...
Well, we know they didn't follow the code. Well, listen, let's get something straight, Sean. Hold on before... Listen. They didn't follow the code because they weren't cranberries. And I begged them, and hold on, before you go back, I begged them, shut your fucking mouth. They don't have anything on us. Stick to your fucking story. Plain and simple. It didn't matter. Jack pressed in my brain, goes, Jimmy, stick to your story. They got nothing. Just tell me, and my code was, when we made this up at the Marriott, the code is cranberries. Stick to your fucking story. They got nothing on us. Long and behold, do we know that in the back of Stern's pocket, he's got this $7 billion TV deal that he's ready to sign. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, by the way, Jimmy keeps referencing Jack. That's Jack McMahon, Jimmy's defense attorney.
Yes.
And with regard to that, what the public may not remember or may not know, Donaghy, of course, shrewdly approaches the FBI the moment he hears from Martino about the investigation, which had been going on for a while, by the way, before he ever even heard about it. And then Martino, there's that great picture where Jimmy and Martino go to court together. Well, at that time, Jimmy doesn't know that Tommy's been a government informant. He's literally part of the defense team. They thought they were forming a collective defense, and meanwhile, Tommy had already flipped.
Jeez.
Yeah, let me chime into that one. So it was a Thursday afternoon, and I get a call from Jack, and Jack's furious with me. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? He goes, your boy and Vicky Herr have been already working with the government, giving them information. Now, they had a problem right there. So in other words, me and Tommy Martino, my co-defendant, okay, and Vicky Herr, his attorney, me and Jack McMahon. I was going to Vicky's office in media for hours a day, going through phone records, trying to go like pinpoint, let's find something, because we're defending ourselves. Because at this point, I'm facing 20 to 25 years. So I'm going through everything, not knowing that I'm sitting in there. And at that time, they already made a deal with the government. So everything I was giving, they had access to that we were going to use against them.
Sean, anything else from the last 10 minutes, Sean?
Well, I got all sorts, but with regard to the cranberries thing, when I said at the beginning of the podcast that my issue with the documentary is that it's all shown through the lens of Tim Donaghy's arguments over the years, cranberries is another example. Because they show about cranberries, they have all three co-conspirators saying, yeah, shut your fucking mouth, right? But then they show one person, and it's Tim Donaghy saying, yeah, well, we know who didn't follow cranberries. And the inference is that's Battista, that Jimmy's the one who violated the cranberries, right? Because he was dealing with the pro gambler up in New York, who is Jewish, by the way. The person that Battista was dealing with in New York was Jewish. Did he have connections to the Gambinos? Yeah, but the main guy was Jewish. But anyway, what the public doesn't know is with regard to sharing the bets, Tommy Martino shared the bets with a friend of his at a sports book in Costa Rica, and Donaghy reconnected with Jack and Ken in February of 2007. They all were sharing the bets. And Jimmy's got a great line in the book, in Gaming the Game, where he says, yeah, everybody got greedy. But that's what happened.
That's what happened. And so Donaghy, by the way, let me just ask you, Jimmy, he's obviously calling you names in this documentary. If you talked to Tim Donaghy today, what would you say to him?
Well, you know what? That's a good question.
Thank you.
But over the past 5 years, we've had text messages back and forth, because we had to deal with restitution. So if he's afraid that, I'm going down and I'm going to send whoever down with them, it was nonsense. Even from this day after the whole thing happened, it was business to me. The only time I had an issue with him is because he's such a psychopath and a fucking liar. He harasses people for a living. And he harassed my daughters a few times on the phone. And I did make a call to him. I said, stay away from my children. I said, listen, what we did was our crimes. We were fixing games together. But when he crossed the line with that, then I had a problem with him. But even years afterwards, because we had to go through restitution, so we've had conversations back and forth, friendly. Then when Tommy and did a movie called Inside the Game, and they were begging me to be a part of their production and stuff like that. And at first, because I was already working with Sean Griffin and Kevin Kelly on my project, Gaming the Game, we were looking at other outlets, and we chose not to do it. And they were frustrated for the fact because I said, you know what, listen, it's a great story. Go run with it. Timmy's all for me, and I have text messages saying, here, come do this project. You're going to make $50,000 off of it. So he's trying to solicit me because they know they needed me. They wanted me to be a part of their story. So everything he said, she said, it was full of shit and lies. Timmy actually texted Tommy, why would you lie about that and say that I didn't threaten, make lies up saying that, I didn't threaten Baba, because he's mad at him. And Tommy said, well, it's the fucking truth. I have text messages between the two of them saying that I never, Tom said, well, you never did threaten him. So, Timmy has to run with that. And it was in his respect, because everyone has their angle. He has to run with that. And as soon as he was coaxed by Warren, whatever his name is, the FBI through John Lauro and all this, and he was coached. He was coached well, and he listened to run with that. Jimmy threatened you and your family. He was working with the Gambinos, and la-di-da-di-da, and that was it. And that's a story he's been running for the past 14 years.
Can you imagine being Donaghy and just sort of live? You said it was in the documentary. You become the lie, right? Like just having to live your life like this. It's an amazing story in so many ways. I keep getting back, and forgive me for the stream of consciousness, but I keep getting back to some of the
Gill,
things.
Gill, we could talk for 3 days
Yes.
and we still wouldn't be done to get into all the intrinsic parts of this story. And this is really my first interview that I did, and I'm going to be honest with you, because, Untold, what, was hoping they were. I did 14 hours of interview and they said to me, we need you to come back for more. And then they decided, no, they're going to run with this. And there was so much more to even the involvement of the animals. The animals, even though it says there that they played the narrative like in 2006 that I took over that. The animals were still involved. I go into rehab, okay, and the animals, because we were working together, were still betting games with Timmy on March 18th. So they were betting a few more games. So this was like, all right, Jimmy's out. Let's put Ruggieri. He's back in the seat. Let's, get you're leading the bus driver and let's keep this bus going because we're making too much fucking money.
Jimmy,
that's another issue I have with the documentary.
Please.
See, Jimmy can laugh at this. This stuff drives me crazy. The producers knew what happened. They chose to leave all this stuff out. By the way, I'm not just talking about Jimmy's narratives on interviews. I'm talking about the documents. Martino cooperates with the FBI. He talks about Pete Ruggieri taking over and the animals taking over on March 18th when Battista goes into drug rehab. And then when Pete Ruggieri shuts the scheme down a few games later, Martino has to tell Donaghy, hey, just, Pete's shutting the scheme down. And Martino complains and begs for one more game. And yet, to watch the documentary, he's just dying to get out of this. And they tee him up for that question on the documentary. They say, well, if Jimmy hadn't threatened you, would you have done this? No, absolutely not.
Get the fuck out of here. So I go down. I'm going into the rehab to get cleaned up for my personal issues. But guess what? It was a Sunday, Monday, went in. 2 days later, Timmy on the schedule. Thursday night, he's got a game. Bullshit. Everyone put their money up. We're going back to work. So the bus continued to drive. Why didn't Scala and the NBA or Scala and the FBI go into that?
But see, Gill, my issue is I'm not disagreeing with Jimmy. But the issue is the media knows this. They've known this for 10 years. Why aren't they asking Scala? Why aren't they asking all the people in the story?
Because it gets back to what I said earlier, which is what you were intimating moments ago, which is just like in this documentary, that you said, they know what the truth is, but at some point they had a production deadline, right?
Yes.
Hey, Jimmy, we want you back. Nah, never mind. We'll just run with this. They're more interested in just here it is, Netflix, and moving on. So, and I think
that's why I had an argument with one of the producers, and I don't know if I showed this with you or your audience. I said, based on what you're telling me, nothing that this show is going to look like is going to be untold.
That's right.
That was like 6 months before it. And that's actually what I think when I saw it. I thought, my goodness, we know all this already.
Yeah, before when I was talking about like stream of consciousness, I was just thinking about I keep getting back to like the plausible deniability. And Jimmy's right. We could talk about this for 13 hours, but it's 13 days. But it's, Donaghy, I just know the audience of VSiN and the sports betting audience. They want to believe those NBA conspiracies so much that it colors, right? It's so nuanced that they're like, oh, well, Tim Donaghy, he's probably right about the NBA, so he's got to be right about this other stuff too, right? So one of the things is, we talked about, oh, look, my refereeing record is so great, so how could I have been fixing games? That Sacramento-LA Lakers game, that Game 6, was it Game 6 or Game 7? I can't remember of that series in 2002.
Game 6 that forces to go to Game 7.
Right.
And the calls at the end of the game, and you watch it 10 times, it's like, what the fuck?
Right. And Donaghy's right. It is the worst officiated game in the history of the NBA, and he's right. Those three guys did get promoted. So again, it's just like there's so much swirling, right?
Gill, hold on, Gill. Who was the money men back in the day? You had Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah.
What's going to get you more views?
Not Vlade Divac and Chris Webber, that's for sure.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, they called it that way. So it's the NBA total control. David Stern is the Vince McMahon. David Stern was the Vince McMahon of the WWE.
I just have to go to Sean here because just for the purposes of thoroughness on this podcast,
Sorry.
Sean, you are not corroborating that part of it.
Listen, I don't get into all this. Like the last 15 minutes of that documentary, I was shaking my head watching that too. We have enough to deal with here, things that I can demonstrate and I can improve. And so with that sort of stuff, I just smile and enjoy it like every other viewer.
Yeah. Jimmy, by the way, question. Are you betting today? You still bet?
I currently work at an I bet crypto site, and I also am at SYFM Cranberries, where I give out picks. I call it my stick pick of the week, because if you remember in the documentary, like most people, your modern day gambler doesn't, have the terms that, moving money and, a nickel, 500 nickel, dime 1,000, stick was 100 grand, and a balloon was 1,000,000. And I'll give out one selection. I also work with the Philly Godfather. Personally, I don't want to give that information out right now, but I'm more too prone to giving out selections. I still talk to some of the sharpest guys in the industry. I still work with them. Over the years, we've kept in touch. I respect their opinion. They respect mine, and I formulated an opinion. And each week at SYFM Cranberries, I'll give my cheap stick pick of the week that I think that would have some intrinsic value to their pocket. How's that sound?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to give you the chance to promote it.
I didn't know that, and the public didn't know that. So there you go.
There you go. I had to give him a chance to promote his stuff. Does your experience with all of this shy you away from betting the NBA, or not really? You just think it's all kosher at this point?
I think it's kosher at this point. There's probably going to be some instances that maybe that they have to follow some protocols. Since everything happened in, from 2007. Do I like the NBA? I think the game has changed. I don't like the way they call it. It's all about TV ratings. And, it gets me sick to my stomach that some of the calls that are made in the game has changed. And I really say that the person that changed the game the most, probably one of the most significant, the best players in the past 15 years has been LeBron James. I mean, he's an animal. He's a fucking animal on the court and what he's able to do. But they made it play like he was kind of like Jordan. Like Timmy brings up a point in the league that they don't want to call on him because he's the eye catcher. That's our viewership. So LeBron, he comes down to, into the paint. He got fouled like all the time. They put him on the free throw line. No disrespect to him. He was an incredible athlete. But I think that the NBA moved his career along with the calls they were making so they could connect on viewership and the public, which was higher scoring games. Because what is the fans like? Points. Where back in the day, it was defense, like in old school basketball. But they ran with the point. It's like the NFL. People like high-scoring games. I'm sorry, I'm old school. I like the defensive point of the game, where men were able to play the game and it called the correct way.
Do you think that we could ever have another Donaghy-type character? Maybe it's an NBA referee. Maybe it's something else. And if so, because I think there's a lot of people, it occurs to me, I'm just trying to get in the thoughts of people listening to this. As I'm listening to you, Jimmy, part of me, there's a little sliver of me, call me crazy, call me guilty, where I'd be like, man, I wish I could have exploited that back in the day, right? That's the gambler inside of me. Oh, man, I would love to have been part of that, getting inside information. Just one time in my life would I like inside information. Do you think it could happen again? And if so, if you could get in on it, would you do it again?
Oof. Listen, what I did and who I was dealing with, that's not ever coming to fruition again. I mean, things have changed. Is inside information out there, Gill? Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm not going to, listen, that's this part of life. It's like things happen. Greed will always control. I don't care. It's the human element. Greed will always control. Do I get a call from time to time on some intrinsic information? Yes. And that's Jimmy the Sheep's stick pick of the week. And I'll put it out there. I get a call from once in a while for whatever. I mean, people still respect me that, I get some information, and I had a way of finding out what it was.
Sean, what would you like to add to this that we haven't already about the media side of this and just your overall, I'll go back to a question I asked earlier. Do we ever expect that, because there's always a flare up, right? 3 years from now, there's going to be something else on the Donaghy scandal. Remember, there were, something came up a few years ago. We were equally disappointed in that. Then there was the episode where Scott Eden over at ESPN basically used all your stuff from Gaming the Game and didn't source you. So do you expect this to ever change? Like, I mean, I know you're an optimist on this thing, but generally speaking, though, at this point, like, isn't that optimism being deflated a little as time goes on?
Yes. Yeah, and by the way, the success of this Netflix thing is further proof of that. It's doing very well. I mean, I've been monitoring all the online traffic. It's doing great, and people just it's confirmation bias. They're believing what they want to believe.
Yes.
But with regard to the media, Gill, Jimmy mentioned a moment ago that over the years he and Donaghy have had to text each other about restitution. Donaghy has mentioned that at least twice publicly that I'm aware of. Once on a podcast and once on a panel. Now think through this for a second. Donaghy has just gotten done talking to their audience and to the host, of course, about Jimmy Battista, the mobster who threatened his life and kids, right? And the hosts don't say, wait, didn't you just 20 minutes ago say that he's a Gambino? Wait, so since when does the government say, hey, you guys figure out that restitution stuff by yourself? You know, the victim has to contact the mobster to ask for restitution. What are you talking about? So no, there's no hope. I would love, Gill, I would love to meet these people, sit down, have a beverage and say, okay, are you aware of what happened that night or during that phone call or whatever? Because I don't think they're realizing what's happening on their own airwaves.
It's amazing to see, and I'm curious because if you do, I don't know how many more of these you have planned, Sean, but this is. To what effect do you think you get the message out? And do you think Tim Donaghy, do you think you're just a gnat to him at this point? To be blunt.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, Jimmy mentioned earlier that Donaghy loves harassing people. He goes bananas with stuff like this. So I might be a gnat, but he's certainly aware of it and acts out on it. So who knows what he thinks? But I don't know. Yeah. And by the way, with regard to the goal here, this is where Jimmy makes fun of me. I'm like Don Quixote tilting at windows. Like I'm hoping at some point people go, oh my goodness, because my argument is, yes, this is the NBA betting scandal, but I believe this is happening with stories more consequential than this. And that's the problem.
Oh, do tell. So you're talking about much more significant things than this.
Yeah, I mean, well, I research organized crime and white-collar crime for a living, and you go, my goodness, these are monumental things, and the media is either lazy, incompetent, biased, some combination of them, and I'm trying to be reasonable and professional, but my goodness, this is such a great example. We're 10, 15 years after this, and they're still getting the story wrong.
Yeah. Jimmy, last word, because we got to run here at some point, but what would you... I mean, obviously you've made your points clear. You made it clear in the documentary as well. But what's your biggest thing that you want people just to pass on to people that just listen? There is a truth, and the truth is on my side, and I've always been truthful. And you should stop believing this guy, or is it something more complex than that?
There's three issues I want to hit on, Gill. First of all, you mentioned the word Scott Eden, the reporter. Scott, I did work with him, and he took a lot of stuff from Gaming the Game. And I have to say this, he's a gentleman, a nice guy. But after the story after he interviewed me, he needed to go to ESPN and the NBA for permission. And I said, what the fuck? I'm like, why do you need permission? Why can't you just write what I'm telling you? I was the guy that orchestrated the whole goddamn thing. He says, Jimmy, I can't do this. Jimmy, I can't do this. So in other words, he was just another person on the blockchain from the NBA and from ESPN that he couldn't report on it. Is he a decent writer? Absolutely. But still, he had to answer to someone. Getting back to that. The untold story, they did a decent job. But the untold story of the animals and everything that went on with my life and the people involved and the amount of money, it hasn't even been surfaced yet.
Do you anticipate doing something yourself on that? Because we'd love to hear that story in detail.
I think so. I think, after, with Sean and my partner, Kevin Kelly, we'll probably get something together on that, on the animals. It's just a matter of time. And hopefully someday you can, check it, for all the viewers out there, please get a copy of Gaming the Game, and you can see all the fine work that Sean Griffin did on the NBA scandal. And you can also check me out at SYFM Cranberries. And if you don't know what that means after watching the Netflix documentary, just shut your fucking mouth and and stick to the story. And I'll be releasing Jimmy the Sheep's stick pick of the week once a week. And if you got $5 in your pocket or maybe a stick, I would make an investment. Maybe that's all.
You said there were three things. Did I count only two? Scott Eden, animal story. Was there a third?
And where you can see me at this day, I'm at SYFM Cranberries.
Okay, just making sure.
At jimmythesheep.com. But Gil, someday, if maybe we'll set something with Sean. I think we could be more than happy to do a follow-up. I would love to go through the games. And, I did get a call from Petowitz before they did the report, and Sean knows about this, that they wanted me to go through the games. And I said, I'll go through every game with you, and I'll say every time that Timmy made a call, and if it affected the point spread and the denomination. And the next thing I heard was click, and they never want to hear from me again.
I would love to do that. I guess the only, because I asked it broadly before, like, were there moments where you're like, oh my God, what the hell is this guy doing? Was there because I would love to do a game log on this, but was there a moment? What was the first moment where you had the meeting with Donaghy? And you realized, this is after you'd been doing it for a while, but what was the first moment, maybe it was with the animals, where you were like, oh my God, it's pure gold?
Well, with the animals, listen, we made significant money, and it was underground, and we were running with that for fucking years. And then when I take it over, and then the animals joined back with me. So we had a falling out, but they were in on the first game when I took it over with their own group, moving exorbitant amount of money, was the Boston game. And that now I know, Timmy, you got $2 on this game. I said, the line was Sixers were 2.5. When it get done, Boston almost went to a 3-point favorite and moved 6 points. And I looked at it, I'm like, yes. And he had his reasons. Doc River was tanking, playoff position and all. But guess what? A, it was the right side. My Elvis had his whistle in his hand, and the rest is history.
You bring up something there that I sorry to, again, stream of consciousness. $2K a game. I get it. It was a free roll for him, right? So it was a great deal for him no matter what. If they lost, it didn't cost him any money. But $2K, when you look back on that, don't you sort of think, wow, this guy
started it. That was my original deal with him, was $2,000 a game.
Then it got to $5,000
because I said, don't waste your own money. I'll bankroll you. You just got to give me fucking winners, and the only way you're going to get winners is with that fucking whistle in your hand.
Yeah, but it did increase at some point. In other words, it got to $5,000.
Yes, it does. It goes from $2,000 to $5,000, and there's also a term that we use from a Down syndrome boy that we grew up with in the Delaware County area. His name was Schmaga, and and that rose to $10,000 a game.
Okay. So Schmaga became 10K? That was the code for 10K? Is that what that was?
Yes, it was. Schmaga, yes. And Joey Ferrigno was his name. He passed away.
Yeah.
And
all right. I wanted to bring that up because the 2K part did seem, I was like, wow, and all for 2K a game. So I just wanted to make that clear that it did get a little more.
And that's one of the main things Netflix. Go ahead, Jimmy.
You don't know what a greedy fuck Timmy was. So listen, at his point, if you're an NBA official, you're making $250,000 to $400,000 a year reffing games. You're already betting games. You can't pick a fucking winner. I was giving him my NFL and college picks when I was working with the Greek, the Chinaman, Billy Walters, and everyone else moving their money. So I would give him football games to wet his fucking whistle. He had to come back to me. Because he was a degenerate. He couldn't pick. Only games he won was the games that he had fucking whistle in his hand.
Sean, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the whole profits thing. You only hear Donaghy's perspective on that on the documentary, of course. That's one of the other things they only do. He says it was $2,000 a game and he made $30,000 to $40,000, right?
Yeah.
Well, as I explained in Game in the Game, Martino told the FBI that he paid Donaghy $115,000 to $120,000, and Jimmy, when he did the math, estimates it's between $201,000 and $209,000.
So there's that as well. Little counting issue.
Exactly.
Gentlemen, listen, I appreciate it. That game log thing is a great idea, Jimmy. Hopefully one day we'll do that. You were great, Jimmy, on the documentary itself. I hope that this little podcast that we do right here sort of just sets the record straight that much further. We can only do what we can do, man. Sean, as always, Gaming the Game still available at places like Amazon? People can still buy it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sean Patrick Griffin.
Gil, thank you for your time, and check me out at SYFM Cranberries, and hopefully someday people will see the untold story of the animals.
We all look forward to that. Sean Patrick
Put
Griffin.
your seatbelt on, boys.
Yes, that will be the real story. Sean Patrick Griffin and Jimmy Battista, thank you so much. The Beating the Book podcast. The Megapod is tomorrow. Thank you all so much for listening.